Good, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, dear friends. It's so good to see so many of you here. I know that many of us, we are very happy to be able to meet after so many months without meetings. So it's a great pleasure to see so many friends and new friends here in the room. And it is a great honor to welcome you to the last session of our SIWI Seminar on water as a driver for peace and cooperation. You know that in this seminar, one part was online. You still have the opportunity to watch the recording. And the other part was just the last session on transboundary aquifers. And now we are really in the final session, when we will be looking at how different scales connect together and what are the really tools that work for finding ways to build peace and achieve cooperation. And my name is Martina Klimes. I'm the advisor for water and peace at SIWI. I'm also a member of the scientific program committee of the World Water Week, and from that capacity, I'm speaking to you. And before we invite our first speakers, I would really like to say that this session would not be possible without the contribution of our co-conveners. So this session is brought to you by UNESCO, International Hydrological Program. We are very grateful for the support. World Resources Institute, Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, IGRAC, and International Hydrogeological Institute. And representatives of all these organizations are here in the room, so if you would like to learn more about their work, please do not hesitate to talk to them after the session. And now, we thought that first we start with a little warm-up, and that will be Menti. So it is a great honor to invite a colleague and dear friend, Marlena Scherltok from World Resources Institute. And Marlena, you are also a storyteller. So through this, you will help us to really find ways how we communicate about water, and that is also one of your jobs at the World Resources Institute. So please kick us off.
Let's see, how does this present? Might need a hand, 1 second.
It's a good time to get your phones.
Yes, we're going to do a Menti poll, yes, which you can do on the computer or your phone. Perfect. So first, we'd really like to get your engagement. We're wondering, let's see. Okay, so hopefully you all can see that. You can use code 8243-3129, and this is for people in the room as well as online. Anybody can vote. We are wanting to know from you all, every city, every community faces different water issues and challenges. These are just a few. But we want you to vote on the top ones that you face in your community. So let us know. We see the votes coming in. Excellent. So right now I see the top two are flooding and drought, followed by water scarcity as well as old and failing infrastructure. So we might be getting into some of these different topics today. So keep this in mind. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you, and we will do more Menti towards the end of this session. And now it is a great pleasure to invite our first guest, and we have the honor to welcome here His Excellency Minister Mahdi Rashid Al-Hamdani, Iraq's Minister of Water Resources. So if we can have you here on stage. Hello, so happy to see you in Stockholm.
Thank you.
And before we invite the second speaker, I actually want to say, so you're Iraq's Minister of Water Resources,
Yes.
but you're also civil engineer. And
Yeah.
I would like to ask you, why do you work with water?
No, I'm actually irrigation and civil engineer. So there is a mix.
And
Yeah.
what made you work with water when you were choosing your career?
Yeah, the water is a major issue that Iraq is facing since a long time ago. So we need to focus on the very urgent issue. Yeah. The location of Iraq is the main, maybe more than 85% for his water source comes from outside Iraq. So it's an arid and semi-arid areas, a downstream. So we need to, focus to find a way to solve that issue.
Thank you very much, and we will hear more about that in this session. But now it's my honor to invite our second speaker in this segment, and that is an associate professor from IHE Delft, Susanne Schmeier. And Susanne is expert on water cooperation, water diplomacy, and international water law. And Susanne, you are a lawyer by training. So what made you as a lawyer work with water?
Well, one reason definitely being the opportunity to work in an interdisciplinary manner with engineers, with hydrologists and so on, but also the interest in how we govern water, right? Iraq is an example how water has been governed in society for thousands of years, and making sure that that continues to be done in an effective manner is something that definitely drives me. I would ask you the first question, Your
Okay.
Excellency, the Minister. We've just found out that we come from very different perspectives and that water management really needs technical tools, legal tools, political tools. Can you tell us a little bit more what you do more specifically in managing water resources in Iraq and how you tackle the many challenges you face when it comes to water at the local and the national level in Iraq?
Yeah, actually, as I mentioned before, we need to deal with the new technique. We need to know our situation in the future, current and the future. So based on that, we have our what we call the SWLRI. It's a strategical study for land and water in Iraq. So that strategy is, we are do it until 2035. So we have a roadmap about our situation. It's that strategy. It's include, many partners working with that strategy. All the stakeholders, all the partners, the Ministry of Agriculture, municipality, Ministry of Environmental, all the parties in Iraq sharing with that, participating in that very important strategy. And the point is, since we are downstream to major river, so we're still suffering from, let's say, no international agreement. The upper part country always developing their irrigation projects without any consultant to the downstream country. And it's not easy to tell our people that there is no more water in the future. So based on that, we need, and we are working since 2 years in order to enhance our irrigation system, because irrigation, it's consume more than 80% from our water, and our irrigation system need to improve every time, not just the responsibility for Ministry of Water Resource. It's also there is a responsibility to Ministry of Agriculture to change their pattern, change the agriculture system using what we call drip irrigation, sprinkler irrigation. This is a new technique. And as well as we can mention to the wastewater treatment plant. This is also another challenge that we are facing. So it's many challenge. It is many factors that we are facing until now, but we are trying to working on it in order to reduce the damage from the climate change, number one, and the development, the irrigation projects in the upper part country. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I know I will actually ask a follow-up question to Susanne because we heard about these challenges in Iraq, but you work in many other transboundary basins. So how would you compare what is happening to Iraq to maybe some other similar basins when these things can really lead to security challenges?
Yeah, thanks, Martina. It's actually something that we do observe in Iraq, but likewise also in a number of other basins around the world, obviously at different degrees of intensity, right? I mean, what we see in the Euphrates-Tigris is an interesting mix of developments, but we can think of other basins where there's, for example, also no agreement, as was mentioned by the minister. I'm thinking of the Helmand Basin between Afghanistan and Iran, but there are many others around the world. But to make it a little bit less doomed, we also have a lot of examples around the world where cooperation is actually happening in spite of very difficult settings, in spite of scarcity, where treaties have been negotiated, but also where at the national level, and the minister spoke about what's being done at the national level when it comes to irrigation, for example, how, oh, that's loud, how at the national level projects are being developed to deal with the situation as is, right? Iraq's struggling but has to adapt and has to feed its people, has to provide water to its people and ensure that at the local level people actually have water available. Similar things happen in the Sahel. So really these different levels I think really need to come together, and we're seeing that how it works in different parts of the world in different ways, and we'll hopefully delve into that a little bit more. A follow-up question, I would like to take it, you see we're moving between levels, local, national, transboundary. I'd like to hear from you, Martina, at the national level, what are examples that you can think of how countries have tackled the conflict risk of water and turned it into a source of cooperation?
I think here the key is something we actually discussed during the online World Water Week in 2021, and it is to breaking the silos. Because when we think of water, it's not really only the water we get from tap. It's also water in our food, water we need for agriculture, it's water we need for our clothes, it's water we need for tourism, it's water we need in many different industries. So on the national level, what is really the key is coordination across different sectors, across different ministries and across different organizations. And as an example, we always give in our training, it was actually what happened in Afghanistan before the change. They work very systematically since 2012 on building a very special coordination mechanism between the technical ministries, the people who actually had access to data and could interpret the data and understood what is it that we are negotiating about. Because if you negotiate about something on international level, you need to have a very good understanding what's happening on the national level. It's like if you are, for example, buying a new car, you really want to understand what kind of car it is. So it's the same with water sector. And then the coordination between the technical ministries and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs that was then leading the transboundary negotiations was really exceptional. So I think I would really like to remind of this example, and of course the situation has changed in the country, but that was really something that could be replicated in other places. And I think now I would like to go back to Minister, and I would like to ask you about this from your experience as a minister. This is what we see in other countries, this is what we identify as something important, but would you be able to share your own experience about this coordination between different sectors and different organizations?
It's okay. So could you please repeat your...
Yes, it's what we talked about is the need to coordinate between different ministries, government agencies at different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. That is what we called as an integrated. So when we're talking about the water, we need to have an integrated water resource management. Integrated water resource management, we can divide it maybe in two terms. One, what we call an entire integrated water resource management, and the other one is a wide term, is what we call integrated water resource management between the riparian country. But the problem is, as I mentioned, there is no any international agreement, and so based on that, we are doing some activities between the all ministries related to the water, taking responsibility with the water. So we are sitting together with the Ministry of Agriculture, is the biggest consumer of water, is the biggest stakeholders, and sitting together dealing with sewage water We need to have, reuse that water. And also we are sitting together with the, Ministry of Environmental. It is one circle. So we need to work around with all parties in order to have water in quantity, good quantity and good quality. So that is what we are doing now in order to enhance our approach to cover, not say all requirement, but at least most of our requirement. Yes. Can I ask a question to Suzanne, please? Of course. If it's possible. Yeah, actually, my question is, when we talk about Iraq, Turkey, and Iran, there is no international agreement, but there is such a country has an international agreement. So is that help for the people who has an agreement? Is it enough to solve their conflict or not? With the agreement, not without the agreement. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I would, and that's not only the lawyer speaking, but generally I would say that international agreements do make a difference, especially if they're being translated also into basin organizations, because you define at some point what are the rules of the game, how do you play together, and you prolong the shadow of the future. You make sure that everyone's in it for the long run, and also it's easier to generate benefits of cooperation. I'll give you an example that I was thinking of bringing in later. If you look at the Mekong, right, it's a basin that's quite different to the Euphrates and Tigris, but still has quite a bit of struggle with upstream countries. Mainly Laos, in the urge to develop, is building dams, and that has raised quite some suspicion, quite some stress in downstream countries. Cambodia and Vietnam, highly dependent on water for agricultural production and for food security, right? If the rice production in the Vietnam Delta broke down, that would be a severe catastrophe for the people. And the dispute really escalated in around 2010, 2011. Vietnam thinking of taking Laos to the International Court of Justice, but because there was a basin organization, the Mekong River Commission, there were always dialogues happening, always technical experts and policymakers, diplomats from the countries coming together, sometimes every month. And that just prevented this spiral from escalation that we're seeing in other basins. Think of the Nile, where there's an institution, but not as developed. So I think that made a difference. It's not going to lead to a situation where there are no conflicts, but I think the risk of escalation is much lower. I've given one example, but I would also like to hear from Martina, if you can think of other examples where cooperation works and where conflict has been turned into cooperation, as is part of the title of this session.
I would first also say that it is, of course, great to have agreements, but they need to be implemented. So we say that agreement is only 10% of the work, 90% is really the implementation. And we do see it in many basins, like there is a Helmand Treaty agreement, but really the extent to how much is it, for example, implemented, that it can be a different question. So I think what I would like to highlight. Okay, thank you, I'm so sorry. I would like to highlight, for example, thinking about more innovative solutions that, for example, technology development provides. And what we see is often we always think about the combination between political and technical track. And from most experience, we see if the political track advances, it's much easier to then focus on finding a technical solution. And one example could be, we see that following the Abraham Accords from 2020, we have this new agreement in Jordan River Basin, but it's actually an agreement between UAE, Israel, and Jordan about building large solar power stations in Jordan, and we will have power that will go to Israel for desalination. You know, the desalination plants are extremely, needs a lot of energy, and then desalinated water will then go to Jordan. And this whole agreement, it was a new Green Deal for the Middle East, was actually started by an organization, Ecopeace Middle East. So they did play involving these other actors who can maybe think and create platforms for this innovative solution. That is also something that can be explored in different basins, and I know it is being explored. I know it's not always easy, but there are possible solutions that can come with new technology. And I think I would like to, Susanne, really, you mentioned these institutions, and maybe I would like to ask a question to both of you. What do you, Minister, first to you, from your experience, do you think that we will see a river basin organization in Euphrates and Tigris in the future? It's maybe a naive question, but what would be your take on that?
Maybe, why not? Yeah, maybe, why not? Because we need to continue dialogue with the upper part country. We'll not stop dialogue. And of course, we respect their right to, develop their projects, irrigation projects, and they should respect our requirement as well. And of course, by the end of the day, we should reach such agreement. This is very important. And by the way, our challenge in Iraq, when we talk about the water management, it's, let's say, 20 years ago, Iraq never suffering from drought. So we just have flood management. And from 2000, let's say, until now, we are, there is a drought, so we are dealing, we are now still a new approach, need to have a drought management. And it's not easy for Iraqis local people, the farmer, explain to them. There is not enough water to have, it's not easy to explain to them. They are not believe that, oh, before there is a flooding, so we have plenty of water. So why you are talking about there is maybe a drought, we will reduce our land agriculture and something like this. So what we are doing, through the 20 years ago, try to increase their awareness about the, the negative impact about the drought. It's not easy. It is a big challenge, and maybe we can add, besides to that, plus to that, we need as well increase the high-level people awareness about what does it mean water for the whole people. Water is mean life. So it is. We are working with a new approach. Climate change is a new factor, maybe 15 years ago. So when we are doing our strategy, we just maybe consider a climate change like 15%. But now we are working to update it, and we need to add that very important factor in our strategy. So we are working on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now if I would follow up on that and ask Susanne, if you were to give Minister some advice in institutional building and what we need to think of, connecting different institutions at different levels to tackle these challenges, what would be your advice to the Minister?
Sorry for having to pass the microphone back and forth, but we're managing well. Well, I think we know from experience around the world that at the very local level with water user associations, at the national level with coordination committees such as the one in Afghanistan that Martina mentioned, and at the transboundary level with basin organizations, institutions do make a difference. So building institutions is definitely, I think, a way to turn conflict into cooperation. But at the same time, we have to, of course, admit that building such institutions is very difficult, especially in contexts, and that's what research also shows, in contexts where scarcity is already high, where pressure on resources is high. We know that there is kind of an inverted U-shaped curve link between water scarcity and, for example, cooperation and institution building. If there is no scarcity, if there is no problem, no institutions are typically being built. However, if the pressure rises, there's also more pressure to build institutions, and that's definitely something, a situation that Iraq and other countries in the region are in. But there's also going to be a tipping point at some point where competition is high and where things have turned so much into a zero-sum game that it's going to be incredibly difficult to actually engage in cooperation. So I think getting things done fast, and that's of course again a naive and hopeful aspiration, but really engaging in the country, between the provinces, between the governorates, and then at the international level is the way to go. And I'm quite hopeful that as climate change pressure rises, the neighboring countries will also increasingly see the need to build institutions and to build resilient institutions, because what we know is that conflict always occurs when the rate of change drought or the change from floods to drought that you just mentioned exceeds the ability of institutions to adapt. And if, of course, there's no institution, there's zero ability to adapt. So I think, I hope the pressure will have a positive impact.
And I would like to ask the last question in this panel to His Excellency Minister. We have quite many donors here in the room and many are following us online. If you would give any recommendation to external actors who would like to help Iraq, what would that be? What would be your advice for them?
Yeah, when we're talking about someone can help Iraq, so we are looking for the people who have a highly experience in helping our staff to updating the strategical study with a new technique, take in consideration the climate change, because until now, we believe that we don't have the highly experience with the climate change. So climate change is a very major factor. We need to deal with this. So we need the help from the people who can have a highly experience to consider a climate change in our situation. That is what we are looking for. As well, the building capacity is very important, but the climate change factor is very important. So we are looking for any people can support us on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much for a very specific recommendation, and thank you also, Susanne, for your contribution. And now we will move on with the session, and it is my pleasure to invite here Laura Malhani from the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and Laura will guide us through the next part of the session.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Jennifer, Aklilu, Melinda, and Faduma, if they would like to come up on the stage. That will eliminate shuffling back and forth during our session. Faduma can join us when she, oh, there she is. You can sit, you can stand, whatever you would like. Welcome everybody here in Stockholm and farther afield. My name is Laura Malahi. I am a program and project manager at the Lincoln Institute of Land Policy, and we are thrilled to be present at World Water Week for the first time this year. Our organization strives to integrate land policy and water policy, both in the United States, where our efforts are led by the Babbitt Center for Land and Water Policy, and increasingly in all of the geographies where we work worldwide. I'm so pleased to moderate this panel, Drivers of Peace for Local Water Resilience. We are so fortunate to have experts from around the world. We have Aklilu Fikrasilasi from Ethiopia, Jennifer Pitt from the United States, Melinda Maldonado from Argentina, and Faduma Ali from Canada. Each of our speakers will be talking about their experiences working with communities at the local level towards urban water resilience. They will touch on data collection and sharing, capacity building, and partnerships as key drivers of peace and cooperation. I will introduce each of them individually. and then they will have the chance to present for about 5 to 6 minutes. Christina Arango will be helping us to control time, so please look up at Christina from time to time. And I will start by introducing Aklilu Fikrasilasi. He is Director of Thriving Resilient Cities with the World Resources Institute Africa, and he is representative of WRI in Ethiopia. Aklilu will be discussing financing and capacity building for urban water resilience in Africa.
Thank you very much for introducing me, and I will be really quick and saying a few words about what we are doing in Ethiopia and some other African countries. I'll be dealing with the local, not transboundary, actually. So I'll be focusing on the cities, how cities are really interlinked with the water resources, and how that water supply and the effects of water lead us to like coordination, like a need for coordination as a must. So as we speak, let me go here. As we speak, like most of the cities, like 70% of the cities around the world are already facing, really dealing with the climate related risks that are really huge number of cities that are affected. About like 2/3 of African cities are about to really experience water-related shocks. They are already in that process. And given the challenges of African cities, particularly the nature of African cities, they are not planned, they are not ready, they have no capacity to withstand the shocks that are really coming up because of the climate change. So with this in mind, WRI is, with its partners, working in 6 African cities on how to help cities to be water resilient. Most of the case, we've been discussing about water supply, how can we, but how about the too much water that is really devastating cities in Africa? It's like both. So for that, we've been working in several African countries, cities, about 6 countries, 3 countries, 6 cities. And these are the key areas that came up through our exercises. We need to plan, because imagine the climate issues, the climate change posing lots of challenges, plan for water, prioritizing vulnerable groups, because in African cities, as I did, most of them are not planned. Slum is a dominant factor. Most of the people are there, the one being affected, and governance, institutional, and get finance right. So from this exercise on our work in urban water resilience in 6 African countries, I would like to bring the case of 2 cities in Ethiopia. Say Addis Ababa. Most of Addis Ababa's water comes from out of the city's boundary. There is also another city in Ethiopia called Dredawa. Most of the people, the residents in the city and out of the city depend on in the ground, underground water. But in Dredawa city, you know, the city been affected for so long by a flood that comes out of the city's boundary. Imagine in both cases, WRI and the partners were dealing with, for example, in Addis Ababa, finding the way how Addis Ababa could compensate the surrounding areas. For example, but the water is coming from out of the city's boundary. So Addis Ababa is consuming the water from out of its boundary. Unless we create a kind of collaboration mechanism, the 2, Addis Ababa and the rest, the surrounding cities, will be really affected. There is a must for collaboration. The WRI is now doing some assessment, planning to do and working toward this, identifying what is a critical area, particularly payment for ecosystem. How Addis Ababa could compensate for the upper stream so that both Addis Ababa and the rest could go hand in hand and move forward. The Dredawa case, imagine the city has no clue from where the flood comes. When it washes away, they don't know. So unless the city of Dredawa collaborates with the surrounding region, which is different, then there will be definitely conflict because of this interaction. So now we are working, collaborating with the regional government, the national government, to establish a platform where these stakeholders can come together before the conflict comes. Because it's not only conflict, it's about the people's life, because the water washing away lots of people, damaging infrastructure and everything. And at the same time, when the upper stream goes with deforestation, extensive deforestation processes, and then flood continues, the underground water will go also down. So the challenge is really conflict. The challenge is really extensive. Then unless cooperation is built, institutions are really created, then the water resilience issue will be just a talk. At Africa level, WRI is also doing a huge, organizing, really sponsoring a huge platform where all urban water resilience institutions come together, what we call AQUA, that African Cities Water Adaptation Platform, where all the stakeholders come together and discuss across the agenda, because there are organizations in water sector, but operating in silos. So how can we bring these all institutions to deal for one agenda? So that's one. And that platform will be supported by a funding institution or a kind of platform supported by a funding, what we call also Aqua Fund, African Cities Water Adaptation Fund, that could be really planned to mobilize about 5 billion USD and to reach out more cities, like about 100 more cities. So a platform, and as we suggested, getting finance right. If cities don't have at least a small catalytic fund to move forward, then they cannot build that cooperation. So I would say that it's not only the regions, it's not only the cross-boundary, but unless we create a collaboration, cooperation at local level, it's really difficult to get water right. So this Urban Water Resilience Initiative of WRI is being implemented by so many partners, as you can see it here, and it's really in 6 cities, African cities, Ethiopia, Addis Ababa and Bredawa, in Rwanda, Kigali and Musanze, in South Africa, Johannesburg and Gabra. We are really advancing a change, establishing a proper tool, helping the cities to move forward. Thank you very much. Let me stop here.
Thank you, Aklilu. Thank you. We will have some time for questions at the end, but we will have all 4 of our presenters go first. Thank you for an excellent presentation, and I know that our next presenter, Jennifer, will also be talking about the importance of cooperation. Jennifer Pitt is director of the Colorado River Program at the National Audubon Society of the United States. Jennifer will highlight the impact of transboundary bilateral water negotiations, cooperation, and partnerships on local communities. Let me pull up your slides.
Thank you. It is such an honor to be able to attend World Water Week. Thank you to the Lincoln Institute for bringing me here. And I also have to say that I had the privilege of joining a group of women from around the globe, the Women in Water Diplomacy Network, and we're all wearing our special pins. If you haven't met us yet, but look out, if you haven't seen the principles and the agenda, please take a look. It is one of the most exciting things I've ever encountered in water. So, but speaking of exciting things in water, I want to tell my story, which is working on the Colorado River in the US. And I work for an NGO, for a non-governmental organization. I've been an environmental advocate for more than 20 years. And I did not imagine when I started my career working on environmental issues on the Colorado River that I would be involved in diplomacy, but I'm here to tell the story. So I want to do a little context setting. If you look at the left, we're looking at the western portion of North America. It's a very arid region and has been extraordinarily developed. The center graphic shows you a kind of a schematic of what has been built on the Colorado River. I would say it started with agreements a century ago that allocated the river, in fact, over-allocated the river, which then set the platform for development to the point that the storage in the basin exceeds 4 times the river's annual average flow. And it's a very variable river, so at times that storage filled, but it is no longer full. The river, that enormous amount of storage has enabled effectively an overuse of the resource. And I would argue that that resource was overused. The water supply was overused even prior to what we have seen unfold in the 20th century, which is the increasing aridification of this basin to the point that the last 20 years, the hydrology is 20% drier than we saw in the 20th century. So that said, because of this development, it's enabled enormous population growth in the Western United States and Northwestern Mexico. I do need to point out that this is a transboundary river basin. And if you can't see on the top left there, there's a little corner of Northwestern Mexico included. And though there are 40 million people who rely on the water supply from Denver in Colorado all the way down to greater Los Angeles and Tijuana in northwestern Mexico. And there's also extensive irrigated agriculture. Like most basins, about 80% of the river's water is used in irrigated ag. In 1944, the United States and Mexico did reach a treaty agreement, and it divides the river more or less 90% of the water for the US and 10% for Mexico. And that treaty agreement has been on the books for all those years. And the United States has always successfully met its delivery obligation downstream. To go to the right, however, and here's where the story starts to touch my heart, is this is a river basin that arises in the snowpack of the Rocky Mountains. Some of you may have heard of the Grand Canyon, one of the most prominent national parks in the Western US, and it's the Colorado River that carved that incredible geologic feature. What most people don't understand is that the Colorado River trickles to its end in the sand between Arizona and Baja California on the border between the United States and Mexico, and that has been the case for most every year in the last half century because of this extensively developed water plumbing system. The consequence of that is that the river delta, so basically the Grand Canyon's worth of sand eroded out into the alluvial floodplain, filled with the Colorado River's entire flow, had formed the most productive wetland deltaic ecosystem in North America. 600,000 hectares wiped off the face of the map because the river stopped flowing. No water, no life. But US was still making its treaty delivery to Mexico. Mexico has put its treaty share to work. However, a 1944 agreement did not address the river's needs itself. So that's where the NGO community got involved around 20 years ago, pointing out that this was not healthy for the environment, and moreover was an indication of trouble to come on the Colorado River system. And we actually started thinking about, how do you move two countries into a place where they can talk about the ecosystem when there are so many other things that compete for the attention of the decision makers and the lead water diplomats for the nations. We realized that we needed binational collaboration. There was no independent solution. The upstream sovereign has all the faucets, and the downstream sovereign has all the land that has been dried out. The only way to move forward here was going to be through binational collaboration. So what did a bunch of NGO partners in the US and Mexico start doing, other than first we started meeting ourselves and talking about it, and then we started bringing in one person after another, sometimes retired government officials, sometimes in-office government officials. But we did that for about a year, and after a year, the governments took on a negotiation. It took us 5 years then to update the agreements, but we got to a point where that treaty agreement was updated with what are called minutes, but they are basically addenda to the 1944 treaty. It's been updated twice now. The first time was a very short tenure, 5 years, because it was so different. They wanted some operating experience to understand how it would work. And the next one's 9 years, and we're coming up on the need to renegotiate again. The 1944 treaty divided the water 90%, 10%, but it didn't really quantify how to share water in surplus or in drought. And so as this package was negotiated, what became clear is that the United States really wanted Mexico to agree to rule of law rules for how to share the water in times of shortage. And that's a very difficult thing for a negotiator to bring home to your national government, to say, we've just voluntarily signed on the dotted line to say, we're going to take less water during a drought. I mean, they did have to understand that they're the downstream sovereign and the US has all the faucets. So I understand that there was some additional pressure, but I also believe that part of what allowed Mexico to sign that agreement was knowing that the United States had also in that agreement committed to cooperate on restoration of not this entire ecosystem, but some modicum of reconnection, some indication that the United States cares about this delta on the downstream end of the Colorado River. So the agreement also includes provisions for Mexico for the first time to store water in US reservoirs, which interestingly, at the time was very controversial. The US thought, we built these reservoirs, we spent our tax dollars, to construct them. Why should we allow Mexico to use it? And of course, today we're sitting there with our reservoirs more than 3/4 depleted. And it's actually an enormous benefit to have Mexico storing water there and helping keep the water surface elevated. Now I really just want to turn to some of the story of what restoration has looked like. So I told you it's half a century with very little water flowing down the river. Sorry, I skipped forward 2 seconds. This was me standing in 2014 downstream of the southernmost or downstream-most dam on the Colorado River, watching the first intentional water release into that dry delta really ever. And with the blessings of the national governments of the United States and Mexico, and before long, the river was back. It was everywhere. It was an 8-week flow. Just temporary, but as soon as the river showed up in communities that sat on top of a dry river channel, people were out engaging with the river. And I think that was one of the real lessons of this was, we were doing it saying that it was for nature and people, but to see the way people came to engage with that river was really a phenomenon. And in fact, it was soon really a fiesta on the river that lasted for 8 weeks. And there were like mariachi bands and picnics and people bringing their grandparents and people bringing their children. It was a meaningful event. And of course, wildlife did come back, and there's great data on the return of bird life, but it's ephemeral. We are not able to do this year round. We are also working to redevelop floodplain habitat with smaller amounts of water to sustain some of the habitat values year round, but we've also now had 2 additional years with releases for in-channel flows for the benefit of the environment, and this year is one of them. The Colorado River today is running to the sea. So we're learning that restoration takes binational cooperation, it takes negotiations, it takes community engagement, it takes an investment from the NGO community in improving the resilience of the irrigation district in Mexico, because if they're not satisfied, it's going to be difficult to maintain environmental flows. It takes strong science, and we have a vision for sustaining this, hopefully through that next agreement to come post-2026. And so I guess, I should add as sort of the coda to this story that in 2020 was the first time that the lower Colorado River states in the US and Mexico all had to sustain a shortage of their deliveries for the first time under that treaty agreement, for the first time since the development of that system. And 2020, it's 2021, again in 22, and it's basically like no news. Like nobody batted an eyelash. We have rule of law agreements, and to me, that is an indication of what good transboundary agreements can do for keeping the peace. It's just not very remarkable. And I would add that I do think that this element of bringing people back to the river, bringing the river back to the people, was a key part of enabling those 2 countries to work together on that difficult framework of sharing shortages, and hopefully will remain a key to keeping them together as climate change continues to dry out our water supply. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I should apologize because I neglected to put up Jennifer's slide. So that's Jennifer who just spoke with you. Sorry, these transitions are a little bit tight, but there are the bios for those who want to read them quickly. We can make them available to all of you, of course, otherwise. Now I would like to next present. Okay. This is not working. Oh, there's, no, that's not her. Okay. Melinda. No, I don't know why. Right? No sé, pero no. I'm not sure. Well, we'll get Melinda to you eventually. Melinda Maldonado from Argentina works with the Lincoln Institute of Land Policies Programs in Latin America and the Caribbean. As such, today, Melinda will be talking about the use of land-based tools to face water challenges in Latin America. Maybe I'll just present everybody's slide once they're done. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Now we will travel to Latin American cities to talk about two problems: water-related risk and financing. So the purpose of this talk is explain and show how we can tackle water-related risk with land-based tools at local level, mainly with a legal perspective. So the first question is, what are land-based tools? Land-based tools are connected to land, are local one. There are a lot of actors involved in this implementation and in the process of the design that are local government, developer, and landowner, and the city as a whole. What principle legitimize the use of these land tools? There are two that are very important. The first one is land value increase due to public action that we want to recover and then to reinvest. And the other is negative impact that we want to reduce. So this land-based tool could be used for different purposes. Now we will talk how we can use this tool for water goals, considering this as a financial tools. So I will share with you 4 cases, 4 tools in different cities. The 2 of these cities have some currently, these tools are in use in this moment, and the other are connected to law that are more new. So the first one is in Bogotá. In Bogotá, the Urban Development Institute has implemented a lot of sustainable urban drainage system in public spaces, in public work. And the original thing here is that the persons who pay this solution are landowners that are benefited because of this public work. You can see there in the map. And something that is very interesting is that these systems are accepted and demanded by local community after understanding their importance. The tool here is betterment contribution. The second case is in Santa Fe in Argentina. Santa Fe is a city with a lot of flood because the river entered into the city and because of heavy rains. The city had implemented a lot of measures, big measures, like gray and blue and green infrastructure, but also little and small measures like these ones that are mandatory rainwater harvesting. The tool here, this tool functions like this. Landowners are required to pay and install, build these devices in exchange for development basic development rights. What happens if these landowner don't do that? Development rights are not allowed. Here, the principle that legitimizes the use of these tools is the negative impact. The third case is in Quito. Quito has a very original and beautiful plan, urban plan, that is connected with the climate change plan. Here there are two groups of standards and two groups of development rights. So if you are a landowner, you want to build, you could do it, but you have to follow some basic standard connected to water. Then if you want to build more, you could do it, sorry, but it requires some extra effort. This is additional standards. And in addition to this, you have to pay in cash charges for these development rights. These go to a fund to finance infrastructure. And the last case is in Santa Marta, where the developer and landowner are required to pay in cash a water charge in exchange for this building right because of the negative impact of this development on water supplies. The original thing here is that all of the water charges go to a water trust which pay reforestation and land acquisition in Napier Basin. So the big question here is, why are these land-based tools for water targets connected to peace and cooperation? And the answer is that these land-based tools are based on justice and equity principles that legitimize their use, and because of these tools involve different actors who are called to finance water-related measures. So in this sense, these tools are drivers of peace and cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melinda. Okay. Just one moment. Let me see. Okay. I'm not going to bother trying to find my little slides with everybody's photo, but I will introduce Faduma Ali, who is a Junior Professional Officer at the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe and Young Scientific Program Committee member. I should add that Faduma was absolutely so helpful in organizing the entire three-part seminar. So Fadum, we all owe you a lot of things. A round of applause. Yeah. So I will simply hold this down. Oh, that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, dear audience. And I'd like to say thank you for attending our session. I know there are many great competition out there. And before I begin, I would really like to give a big thank you to my amazing team, the co-conveners, the SPC members, Christina, Alice, and Martina, and as well as our fantastic speakers. I was able to work with the best team and to have, it was a great pleasure to help organize these three seminars on water as a peace, as water as a driver for peace and cooperation. Okay, so climate change affects the security of all life that inhabit the planet. And it has had and continues to have catastrophic implications for the world's most vulnerable populations, as well as causes environmental and economic devastation. And the devastation is becoming increasingly visible. I mean, the drought that is currently ravishing the Horn of Africa is one such example, particularly the countries of Somalia, Ethiopia, and Kenya. And the US government's Humanitarian Information Unit recognizes that more than 18 million people face severe hunger in these three countries. And just to give you an idea of how many people these are, it's the combined populations of Austria and Hungary. The floods in Pakistan is another visible example that has recently been in the news. And the BBC is now reporting that 1/3 of the country is underwater. So officials estimate that more than 33 million Pakistanis, that's 1 in 7 people, have been affected by the flooding. And to give you another example, this is almost the entire population of Canada, which is about 38 million people. And I'm trying to show you the amount of people that are affected by these devastations to really drive home the extent of these damages. And these are only 2 examples. So as you can imagine, climate change intensifies the risk of conflict as resources begin to dwindle and communities are displaced. And to be resilient is to adapt to the changes before you. And to do this, I believe that youth engagement and Indigenous knowledge are vital components to the promotion and preservation of peace. And their traditional knowledge, Indigenous knowledge, is critical to addressing the water challenges that we face today. And that will continue to grow as the climate crisis threatens the security of our communities, our regions, and our countries. Meaningful participation of youth is also central to finding solutions. It's not enough to simply include them in meetings and discussions. Their inputs need to be in the development of policy processes. According to a report from the Stockholm Environment Institute, a child born in 2020 will experience on average twice as many wildfires, 2.6 times as many droughts, 2.8 times as many river floods, and 6.8 times more heat waves in their lifetimes as a person born in 1960. So youth really have unique perspectives to offer as we search for solutions and find ways to collaborate among sectors and perspectives to reach a common objective, which is to build a resilient, sustainable, and more healthier future for all so that no one is left behind. I have a personal example of a time when I was given the opportunity and room to find new avenues of engagement and I guess I can say innovation. During my time at the OSCE mission to Bosnia and Herzegovina in Sarajevo, so the OSCE, as Laura says, stands for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I was able to use my local youth connections, youth being the key word here, to partner with the University of Sarajevo to develop a citizen science project for the Drina River to raise awareness of environmental issues through particular field research and catalyze local communities' activities in preserving and protecting the environment through joint efforts. A component of the project was for students among ethnic lines, the opportunity to assist in the collection of water samples on the Drina River. Unfortunately, my contract ended before I was able to partake in that. As a member of the Water Youth Network, I've had the opportunity to meet so many brilliant young minds that are knowledgeable about the climate crisis and really ready to help. But they need the room to do so. So this is a call for each and every one of you in this room to really give that room and opportunity to young people, because there are plenty of them. So there is an African proverb that really sums up everything I have been trying to convey here. Many small people who in many small places do many small things that can alter the face of the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you, Faduma, especially, and thanks to all of you. I apologize for making you crane your necks, but I thought it would be convenient if you were up here in case you may absolutely sit, please. Yes. We now have another section of the Mentimeter, correct, Marlena? Do we have another part of the Mentimeter before the questions and answers? I think. Yes, please sit. I didn't mean to give you all a stiff neck. We will take questions and answers after Marlena does the Menti again. This is Marlena Chertok from World Resources Institute.
Thank you, Laura. Let me just pull up the Menti again. Oops. Is there another microphone we can pass around, perhaps? Okay. Anybody? Anybody with a question for our panel? Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Anna. I'm working with Water Institute Tanzania. So my question, I don't remember the name, but to the madam who were presenting about the issue of land-based tools. This was fantastic, but my question is, it seems like they are just basing on the landowners. I was trying to thinking of my country, most of the people are tenant, and they are water users only. So how are they addressed to these initiatives? Because most of them, they do use water, but all I hear from these tools, they're just imposed to landowners. And my other question is, what about rural areas? Are they able to install the tools or to implement the tools that you were talking about? Thank you.
That functions. Thank you, Anna, for the question. It's a very important question. The idea of this land-based tool is that they have a redistributive effect. So we need the landowner and developer, but we have to require things to this person so we can reinvest in another part of the city, in the part of the city that are more vulnerability. So this is very important, and of course, we have a part important of the city that have this condition. So the principle that I have talked is this, that the redistribution of this investment from one part of the city to another. And I don't know if I understand the second question. Could you repeat, please?
Okay, the second question was about in rural area. Will these tools also be applied, as most of the people are poor? And if you just put the rule, you can deprive them the other human right or something like that.
No. According to the taxation, there is a principle that is contributing capacity. So if you have no money, you can't pay this tax. So this is very important in taxation. So they haven't to pay these kind of measures. Yes.
Hi, thank you. I'm Caroline from World Resources Institute. My question's for Jennifer. Can you tell us a little bit about engagement with indigenous communities in treaty making for the Colorado River?
Such an interesting question. There are, of course, many indigenous communities. In fact, on the US side of the border, we count 30 in the Colorado River Basin. Many of them have they all have some rights to water on the Colorado River, and in most cases, those rights aren't settled. They don't actually have access to their water. That said, on the border, it has been challenging in the diplomatic space because in Mexico, tribes don't have sovereign rights. Mexico says all our people are indigenous people. We all have mixed blood. We all belong to that community. So there's no special privilege. And so in the context of the protocol of the diplomatic negotiations, while the tribes in the US have asked for a seat at the table, they have not gotten one. And I am first to say they are sovereigns. Like, I'm just an NGO. I have ideas, but that's about it. And supporters, but that's about it. But it has allowed me to work in some pretty novel and untraditional ways to sort of get my nose under the tent and get a seat at negotiations because I was willing to basically do whatever it took to work. But I recognize that for the sovereign tribes, that's not possible. You can't check your sovereignty at the door. So one thing we have done, and it's a little bit of a compromise, and we don't know yet if it's going to work, is started to work with the Cocopah tribe, which is located in the US, in Arizona, directly adjacent to the river channel, downstream of that final dam. So they live on a dried out river. And we have worked with them to develop plans for some floodplain restoration. And with the thought being that while they are completely outside of that binational process right now, there's a restoration project directly across the river from them in Mexico that is operated under the auspices of the binational treaty agreement. And so we might get to the place where, as they begin to develop their project on the ground, we should do some technical coordination because, I don't know, there's like half a kilometer between the projects and the birds aren't going to recognize the difference between them. So let's talk across the border. And my hope is that that is a way to bring them into the process that ultimately lets them come through the front door as a sovereign. But we don't know yet if it will work.
There are periodic water releases that are these unique to the Colorado River, or are they used elsewhere as well?
I'm not a global water expert, although if I spend enough time here, I might become one. I do. So our idea for the pulse flow really was born out of the observation that there were inadvertent flows reaching the delta in the 90s. So it wasn't that the river never flowed into the delta, it's that it only spilled, or there was like a tributary lower down on the system that would run once in a while, and it seemed to be flowing on average every 4 years. So we had this idea that a big flow of water every 4 years might be the answer. So I honestly don't know if it's being used in other places. And by the way, we started realizing that by delivering a big volume of water once every 4 years, we were losing more water than we cared to groundwater recharge, which has benefits to Mexico, but not the benefits we wanted to see for the ecosystem. So we've modified our water delivery protocol for environmental flows, and they're currently looking somewhat smaller over a longer duration, creating a smaller river, and more frequently in terms of the years. We had a flow last year and a flow this year as well. In fact, it's running right now.
Great, thank you. And just to remind everyone, for those of us in the room as well as online, feel free to go to menti.com and use the code 8243-3129 to ask any questions of our panel, or raise your hand if you're in the room. We have a wide variety of expertise up on this stage, so please feel free to ask any of your questions. Yeah.
The assistant, hi. So I have a question about, and I appreciate the the engagement of youth in what you are doing. So I really like the approach, like, do you have any cases, like, do you have any examples that you have included youth in ground and they have come up to you and just work together, or some, oh, it can be Colorado Basin as well as our youth representative as well. Yes, both of you, thank you.
Um, we have the benefit of working on a charismatic project. And so as the river has run, it started with my partner NGOs in Mexico operating programs in schools and bringing kids out to the site. They raise the NGOs raise the money, hire the school buses, run the programs, feed everybody a carne asada lunch, but take them out to experience nature in a landscape that's really, this is a blasted landscape. It's a river delta where there is no river anymore. So they live in a pretty decimated landscape, but they get to come to a river with native trees and there's shade and there's birds and there's water. It's it gets them excited, and so increasingly we're seeing people joining volunteer groups that have been set up, and they come and they help do the planting on the work days when we're actually out there putting native trees into the soil in the floodplain. So I think you have to create some points of entry. If you didn't know the river was there, it would be hard to come say you wanted to join the restoration effort. But having created that little glimpse of the river, it's drawing people in, and lots of kids.
Actually, with our intervention in the urban water resilience, so the purpose, particularly in we as WRI, we implement a tool, a perfect approach, I should say it, for us, and it's been tested actually, what we call cities water assessment tool. So it starts from the institutional analysis and then coming up with actions. And then in the middle, we have a consultation with each level of the government partners, the youth, a business, and all those stuff, so that like the hierarchy of the implementation of the city water assessment tool, the approach is like we do the whole institutional assessment of not just the city, we say city region. It goes beyond the political boundaries. So after doing that, we proceed with the discussion, consultation with each level, the government, NGOs, private organizations, and the youth. All those stakeholders come together, discuss on the agenda, and find what are the key action areas to turn the city from water supplying to water resilient. So actually, unless we engage with all partners, and we believe that the solution will not work. So of course, we have that level of engagement with each level of partners. Thank you.
Maybe, yeah, right in the front.
I'm Eddie Moors. I work at IT Delft in the Netherlands. Thank you very much for quite nice presentations. I noticed that in some of your presentations you were also talking about the future. And I think one thing that I see as a big challenge that we're probably going to face more droughts. So the partitioning of water, I think, is becoming more and more difficult. Could you say something about what you think you will need actually to maintain, say, the present understandings about the sharing of water in a condition where you will have less water? Of course, the youth, I think. But
I'll try. I mean, we need people. So certainly where I come from, and I imagine where most of you come from, even if water is central to our lives, we're the water nerds. A lot of people around us aren't that aware of where their water comes from or the centrality of water to their lives. So we need to build that awareness. And I think, I'm now getting the gray hair and I'm so old enough to see the generational change, and education does work. Youth engagement does work because, I've seen enough change in my life to know that now. But I would say the other thing, I mean, we in the Colorado River, we get a lot of good press for being a basin and where collaboration really has worked. And it has, but I would say that at this moment, we are on the cusp of our own day zero. I'm not kidding. We are on the cusp of total governance failure and no water running in the Grand Canyon and no water running downstream to the entire lower basin, not to mention the Delta that we've worked so hard to put water back in, but all those millions of people. We need the state parties that have a compact on the river to realize that climate change is all of our problem and they all need to be in on the solution. And our rights systems from 100 years ago are not built to address the moment. And so we're going to have to change some things.
Thank you so. Okay, we are just about out of time. I want to thank again Aklilu Fikraselasi, Jennifer Pitt, Faduma Ali, and Melinda Maldonado, also Marlena Chertok, and I think that we're just going to leave you with a resource that we have all worked on, all contributed to. It's really terrific. It's the Toolbox for Water Resilience. It's up on the screen now. For water security, it's up on the screen, and we can certainly put it in somehow get it to you. But there's a lot there. There's a lot of resources. Definitely worth checking out. So thank you all so much for participating in this panel. Thank you all.